Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Taming the SaaS Chaos. We're excited to have you join us today as we dive into this important topic. My name's Emma, and I'll be the host today. So with the rise of cloud-based tools, organizations are facing an enormous, an overwhelming number of SaaS applications, often leading to inefficiencies and security risks and unnecessary costs. So today we'll explore strategies to get SaaS sprawl under control, optimize usage, and ensure better governance across your technology stack. So we're thrilled to have Matt Ganther and Dan Miller with us today from Alton Strategy Group, along with SafePass's Henny Vermeulen. So before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items. The session will be recorded and shared with you after the session. And if anybody does have any questions, which we hope you do, then please feel free to pop those across in the control panel. And we'll get to those at the end of the session in the Q&A session. So I will quickly ask the panel to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll dive in today's topic. So Matt.
Thanks, Emma, and it's great to connect with everybody. Again, I'm Matt Ganner, the CEO and founder of Alton Strategy Group. Looking forward to today's discussion on SaaS sprawl.
Thanks, Matt. Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Great to be with everyone. I'm Dan Miller with Alton Strategy Group, supporting Matt and the rest of the data team at Alton Strategy. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Dan. And Henny?
Hi, Emma. Thank you for introducing us. My name is Henny Vermeulen. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at SafePass, and looking forward to having a discussion around SaaS sprawl.
Great. So this is the agenda we will be following today. So we'll be talking about, what actually is SaaS sprawl? What does it all mean? The challenges associated with that. How access governance can be your best, can be an ally when it comes to SaaS sprawl. How you can actually, control SaaS sprawl. We'll share a case study, and then what happens if you don't do anything. So Matt, over to you. Oh, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Appreciate the intro, and really, like I said, we're excited to be here today. Talk about one of the key areas that's near and dear to our hearts here at Alton Strategy Group. As we're all aware, SaaS adoption has skyrocketed. I think if we jump in the time machine and go back, 10 to 15 years when we were all working in data centers and on-prem types of solutions, I don't know that we would have thought we would have been here where those types of models and the migration to SaaS applications, I don't think we would have thought we would have been here. So it's really taken off in the past couple of years, bring a lot of agility, innovation, and really capabilities across the business. With that, it has created a lot of challenges with the way the business teams are operating. In a lot of ways, it's created some unregulated growth in terms of risk, efficiency, shadow IT, and security gaps. In addition, some of the access management has become, daunting without the right governance in place, and it's really been a key point that it's not just the SaaS you're using, it's how you're using it, how you're managing it, how you're really assisting the business and driving some of the use case, making sure that it's overall managed and overall within the scope that you had as a business had thought it would end up in. One of the things that really is helped with is the speed, scalability, and cost efficiencies, the rapid deployments without the complex infrastructure, and then the costs of subscription-based models have allowed different expense models with reduction of upfront expenses. Enterprise-grade tools are now accessible to businesses of all sizes. The collaboration of productivity, we're seeing that in ways that we hadn't expected, in ways that have really become new and really allowed companies to move to market faster. In terms of continuous innovation, a lot a lot in the way of the collaboration and productivity. Just making sure that businesses are allowed to innovate without the interruption that managing, patching an on-prem system has brought to us. So a lot of ways. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think ultimately what SaaS has allowed businesses to do is go farther, faster, right, at the end of the day. And it's really just how do you manage the speed and innovation and go-to-market strategy and balance that against your risk profile, right? I think is ultimately the objective of, one, understanding what your SaaS sprawl looks like, and then two, how to better manage and monitor that SaaS sprawl as you continue to scale and or enter new markets.
Eddie, anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge these days is, like Matt was saying, is just how to get your arms around this, because it's so easy to onboard most of these SaaS solutions, and folks don't typically tend to think twice. They have a problem they've got to solve. There's a solution out there, and they just move forward, right? And in many cases, it's a bit of a challenge, just keeping track of what's going on, who has access to what, and protecting the enterprise as a whole.
Yeah, great points. So I think before we move on, I think it's important to kind of draw some delineations and really define some terms here. So when we think of SaaS sprawl, we really think of it as the unchecked proliferation of SaaS applications in an application. And that happens, in a few different ways. And it's really not so much on the larger applications, your ERPs, your enterprise-wide applications. In some cases, it's really those point-to-point solutions. And this is a really great graphic that kind of shows that there's a lot of little enterprises, little enterprises in there, little applications that build up over time. And of course, this creates a problem where there's no centralized tracking into who's using what, how much it costs, or what data is going into those systems. I think that is really one of the areas where there's a significant amount of cost related to breach is the data, and making sure that organizations know what goes where, when it goes there, and then how to manage their teams as they have access, or maybe if the organization doesn't really know what's there. So Matt, can you help us understand what some of the what some additional business risks to SaaS sprawl would be?
Yeah, I think Dan, as you touched on, so SaaS can take the forms of a large-scale application, such as an ERP. It can also take the form of, for example, note-taking software, right? And within the note-taking software, the smaller subsets of software within an organization, there's a lot of enterprise data that's available and or probably consumed or processed by those smaller applications. So it's really important to understand from a business perspective, if you think about it just purely from a controls lens, where does my data live? How is my data being accessed? And where's my data being stored, right? And ultimately, not only looking at those large applications, but also looking at the smaller note-taking type of applications, any AI models that are in use, things like that. So I think the surface area that companies have to look at to evaluate risk has grown as a result of the onboarding of those smaller SaaS-based applications.
That's really helpful, Matt. Henny, anything from your side?
Yeah, I think another aspect to it all is a lot of these vendors are scattered around the globe, right? So that brings a whole new challenge in terms of data privacy, etc. Once you upload it, who knows where your data is? And so it's becoming ever increasingly more important to have visibility on who's the vendor, where are they based out of, where is their data centers located, who can access what within these SaaS solutions, because that ultimately drives your risk appetite, right? So I think that, coupled with what Matt had mentioned earlier, is really what I see the biggest challenge being. Is in many cases you just don't know, right? These vendors don't always publicize all of this information, and end users are in most cases don't think to ask those questions.
Yeah, that's a great point, Henny. And I think one thing to, really touch on, as we've touched on the point solution, the note-taking solution. And in a lot, that can happen in a lot of ways. That can happen in terms of a sales team, purchasing a translation application. And that really is, there's a lot of ways that can go wrong. Build up of a shadow IT, requiring redundant licenses, using a personal focus project management tool, really not understanding what tools are available within the enterprise, and then creating redundancies when we get 2 or 3 or 4 of those. And that's really not to mention, the shadow IT that kind of comes up and out of all of that as folks, need to support from a business perspective, what someone in the business may purchase, how they may need to manage their access on that side. When we talk about the lack of centralized controls, I think we've talked about that a bit in the past, over the course of the last few slides. We've talked about the lack of visibility into what the user identities are, where they are, how they're using data and applications. And then, of course, there are those security gaps where there's over-provisioned users, dormant and unmanaged accounts. And then, as we mentioned, the redundant systems and the over-provisioning of licenses within systems. When we talk specifically about challenges, Matt, Henny, anything to add?
I would just say maybe just to summarize, because I think there's a lot of data points that we just shared. I think it's important for folks to understand what applications they have in their environment, right? And regardless of size and scope. Number 2, it's to Henny's point, it's really important to make sure you understand where your data is being processed, how it's being managed, how it's being used. And then the third piece, which I know Henny's going to touch on in a lot more depth that Dan, you just touched on, is how do you govern this from an access management point of view? So maybe, Henny, that's a good segue into the next portion of this conversation.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, I think that covers it. So in terms of access governance and benefits, we really need to make sure that we cover the access governance in terms of least privilege. It's easy to just grant access as an admin and get in there and have full access so that you can get everything done. Unfortunately, with that, it exposes the enterprise, right? And so we do need to consider whether someone actually needs said access. The problem is not when things go right. The problem is more when things go wrong. What I mean by that is, in the event of, let's say, a hack, someone gets a hold of your credentials and is able to, get into the application. If you have too much access that you don't really need, that poses a very interesting risk to the organization, because now that hacker that's coming in has the ability to get to more data than he otherwise should have. So one of the principles of least privilege is, let's try to lock things down to only the absolute bare minimum of what people need. And what that allows us to do is mitigate that risk. Sometimes companies do still get hacked. But if you minimize that risk, the amount of damage that the hacker can do is fairly little, right? So we obviously need to make sure that we cover regulations as it pertains to what data is available and how that data is available. Certain regions in Europe, as well as in other countries, have specific privacy policies that needs to be adhered to. So of course we need to make sure that we can cover all of that. I think we can go to the next slide. I think.
Sure.
Perhaps you can talk to our audience about, why policy-based access is so important, and why organizations are starting to, move away from or expand on top of their role-based access management solutions.
Is that for me?
Or anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So policy-based allows us to tie in with our risk controls and risk appetite to ensure that we provide governance in terms of specific access rights. And so that's really why it's really important to base things off policies, because policies will allow us to do fine-grained access controls. There was a time where most companies were just looking at things from a role-based perspective, and that gave them a false sense of security, because it alluded to the fact that they thought that a role only gave certain access, but in reality that role had way more access than they realized. So when you switch over to a policy-based access control, what you're now doing is you have certain rules that governs who can do what. And I'll get into some examples here. I think we've got a use case that we're going to get into here in a minute. And so we'll talk a little bit more about those details. Dan, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's a really great overview of the differences and why policy-based is the way to go. All right. So just how do we tame the chaos? How do we really understand what we need to go do in the SaaS environment that we currently have today? I think it's management of your SaaS environment, management of the users in those environments that teams are aware of, and also the vendors that are in the system. I think an important piece to mention here is we're not just talking about employees, but maybe third-party vendors who are managing some inventory, or may have a reason for support. Check those accounts. Check that. Check and make sure the vendor still needs the access and is using that and not sharing that. You can make the argument that vendor managed accounts are slightly more risky than standard accounts, but really it's applying a standard metric, user reviews every 3 to 6 months, quarterly or semi-annually. I think the next step is really to provide training and help team members understand, the note-taking application is great, but here's the risk it presents. No one really wants or aims to be the person who causes the data breach, but they're just not aware of the impact of a lot of different activities, things they may do, and the impact that may have. Another piece is really opening up the process to end users and making them aware of the application portfolio, what's there for their use, and what's maybe not there. And if something's not there, how they get a new application introduced. Really helping the team understand the why, and also there's a component of the how there too. I think the third piece there is identified, to Henny's point, as over-provisioned accounts and also segregated administrative access within the SaaS platforms. And what I mean by that is having your system admins have their day-to-day access, and then also having a high-level emergency type of access that they may need to perform, to bring a system back up or to perform a maintenance task. Making that available to them, and also in a just-in-time model. So not having that available to them 24 hours a day, but maybe for the hour that they may need it. That same just-in-time provisioning really applies to new users. If someone's coming on, provision the access day of, so their access isn't available for 2 weeks before they start. I think the third piece, and I just touched on it a bit, is automate provisioning and deprovisioning, and consider the just-in-time provisioning. Make sure the access is only there for as much time as it has to be. And I think the last piece there is to continuously monitor key areas. Internet usage. Are folks accessing SaaS sites that they shouldn't be? Getting back to the vendor access, and even watching expenses to see what's coming through month over month for a certain user. Are they expensing access to that note-taking application that we keep referring back to? Or are they continually buying new apps and running them through as small $25 a month expenses? What else can we add to this list, Matt?
I think in addition to those things, it's also, you touched on it before, just so knowing where your employees are in the sense of how they're accessing your environment or SaaS-based applications is really important, especially with folks being kind of remote, either across the US, across the globe, and accessing company information. So again, going back to foundational fundamentals, just making sure that everything that should be coming into your network is coming through the appropriate, VPN or other protocol to access both your internal networks as well as your kind of SaaS applications behind a identity provider, right? So I think that's just foundational.
Okay. Anything to add, Henny? Have I lost everybody?
No, we're still here. I think we've lost Henny sound.
Oh, have we lost Henny?
Sorry, I was on mute. So what I was saying is, it's important to be aware of the whole virtual setting that Matt was pointing out. And I think that one of the things that we need to add in here is the old bring your own device kind of challenge, right? That many organizations have. Also, sometimes they forget to encrypt removable storage. So most people these days have a work laptop and then they have their personal laptop. So, the question becomes, how do we protect the company data? If someone has the ability to move data from their work laptop to, say, a personal device, be it a cell phone or a tablet or a laptop, whatever the case may be. So we do need to consider those things as part of our overall cybersecurity footprint in locking down unnecessary ways for people to essentially remove data from the corporate enterprise. So I think that's also another element to consider in taming the chaos.
Great. And if you could walk us through the case study, Henny. I know we can't actually mention our customer's name, but if you can give
Sure. Yeah, so we recently engaged with a client, a complex enterprise organization, to address critical challenges within their IT controls environment. This organization utilized an on-premise e-business suite ERP system alongside a growing cloud presence, including some ERPs in the cloud. They're currently executing a multi-year strategic initiative to fully migrate to the cloud, underscoring their commitment to modernizing their infrastructure. The client's application landscape is extensive, and it includes hundreds of applications that support a diverse business function. Of these, 14 have been identified as vital for the accuracy and reliability of their financial reporting. An area subject to increasing regulatory scrutiny, as we all know. The client leverages ServiceNow for IT service management. They ensure a structured approach to incident resolution and change control. They also utilize SailPoint for identity governance and administration. As part of a broader transformation program focused on enhancing internal controls, a comprehensive assessment of their IT environment was conducted. The assessment revealed significant gaps in their visibility, particularly concerning user access and privilege management. Internal audit and compliance functions expressed the critical need for enhanced capabilities to drill down into their privilege level information, enabling them to effectively respond to external audit requests while demonstrating adherence to regulatory standards. The challenge unfortunately extended beyond the fundamental principles of segregation of duties, such as preventing payable managers from accessing general ledger. While such high-level controls were generally in place, the assessment revealed a lack of granularity in access management. For example, within eBusiness Suite, functional level access controls were not consistently enforced. Similarly, in their SAP environment, T-code level and object authorization controls were required to improve their risk appetite. The lack of fine-grained visibility hindered their ability to meet increasingly stringent government requirements and demonstrate compliance in both internal stakeholders and external auditors. This organization operates in over 100 countries, adding a layer of complexity to their IT environment. User provisioning processes varied significantly across different business units and geographic regions. While some areas relied on formal ServiceNow workflows, others still utilized informal-based requests, introducing inconsistencies and potential security risks. The utilization of SailPoint automation portions of this, but still had manual processes tied to it. From an access certification perspective, the client was leveraging existing access management tools. However, this approach presented several challenges. Determining the appropriate access approvals proved very difficult, as the knowledge of who initially authorized access was not always readily available. Furthermore, access certifications were often performed at a high level, certifying abstract roles or catalog items rather than individual privileges. The lack of granular obscured critical details, such as the fact that granting a finance manager role might inadvertently provide the user with the ability to reverse journal entries, a clear violation of segregation of duties. Finally, the lack of seamless integration between access management systems created a fragmented and inefficient control environment. Despite the organization's commitment to operational excellence, a significant number of personnel, including both internal staff and third-party managed service providers, were dedicated to manually managing access-related tasks. This manual effort resulted in substantial operational costs and increased the risk of human error, compromising the effectiveness of their controls. SafePass offers a solution to automate controls across the enterprise, addressing IT general controls, IT access controls, IT application controls, and segregation of duty conflicts. While the client had well-intentioned policies, these were often not sufficiently specific to prevent risk. For example, a policy prohibiting the creation of a supplier and subsequently pay the same individual was not consistently enforced by their existing systems. SafePass enabled the client to map business-level policies to a fine-grained level, ensuring that controls were effectively implemented and monitored at the transaction level. The mapping of change control, configuration management process, and service request systems into SafePass enabled tickets to flow back and forth between the external systems. The availability of standard APIs minimized the need for extensive integration beyond basic user acceptance testing. This resulted in a centralized orchestration of access controls within SafePass, mitigating the risk associated with fragmented access management. SafePass became the system of record for audit purposes, providing a comprehensive view of user access rights and segregation of duties conflicts across the enterprise. The client could now proactively monitor risks through the user lifecycle, receive requests from provisioning tools such as SailPoint and ServiceNow, and enforce policies through automated API integration. SafePass also facilitates consistent auditing across applications on a global scale. The solution enables the client to manage roles based on the specific security context of each market, ensuring compliance with local regulations and business requirements. Finally, SafePasses enhance the audit process by providing auditors with a dedicated portal to access independent evidence, such as audit reports that reconcile provisioning requests with audit users. This provides independent evidence that the business is operating controls effectively. Back to you, Emma.
So this is fantastic. So obviously this organization now has their SaaS under control, but what happens if you don't do anything, Dan, Matt?
Yeah, Emma, that's a great question, and this was a really great slide to put together because, you know, in a lot of ways, the cost of doing nothing, it's difficult to put a price tag on it, and we've managed to do that through a significant amount of research through IBM. Putting the hard cost at 4.8 million, 4.8, almost 4.9 million dollars per breach, and 5 million for public cloud breaches, and that's for 2024, and that cost is only going up. I'd say leading up to that, you know, if we want to look at some of the operational items, it's continued wasted licensing spend. 49% of applications of enterprises are not deployed, according to Xylo in a study they put out just a year ago today. They also pointed out that the average company has 15 duplicative online training apps, 11 project management tools, and 10 team collaboration apps. Now, really, we've seen some consolidation in some of the applications, but really this was a number that was very surprising to me, just as the proliferation just keeps happening. And finally, there's time lost for the support team. It's really we're seeing a lot more of due to the complexity of the environments and downtimes due to the outages. You know, no longer is a system down for one issue, a system's down here, and the impact kind of moves upstream and downstream, and the ability to react and respond and bring those systems back is getting slower in a lot of ways. So the cost of doing nothing is quite an interesting study. So Matt, anything to add to that?
I think to add to that, I think, in the event of a breach, right, there's always reputational impact. So there's hard costs, which Dan, I think you did a great job hitting on those hard costs. In addition to that, there's, brand reputation and trust factors that also need to be taken into account. And in some cases, those are worth significantly more than, a $4.9 million payment in terms of actual hard cash out the door. So it's important for companies as they think about the cost of doing nothing, not only to quantify what that material known cash is, but also understand what the broader impact could be to their business, both within the industry or broadly across the market. So I think it's important for folks to know that. And number two, I think the other piece that we touched on throughout this, but just to kind of bring it all the way home, is really the impact on the employees, the customers, the vendors that work with you. In the event your SaaS platform that's in use were impacted in some way, there's a whole ecosystem now that will be impacted if you're not managing your SaaS application appropriately to, one, kind of make sure it's streamlining the operations within your business, but two, also to protect your own company, but also the companies that work with you. So I just want to bring that home.
Yeah, great points there. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the actual session. So we do have time for Q&A. We have touched on some of these questions a bit, but just to recap for our audience here. So shadow IT is a growing concern. So how can organizations, identify and mitigate the risks of unauthorized SaaS adoption? So what would be your top pieces of advice?
I think first and foremost is there's an education, piece. And like I said earlier, no one really wants to be the person who's cause of a breach. And I think one is the adoption, and then two is opening up the avenues to kind of bring applications in or point folks in the right direction and really help them understand the dangers of the shadow IT and really help bring that back into a supported environment. Make that useful. Make that discussion point open. That's what I would say. Henny, Matt, anything to add there?
Sorry, I think the important thing is to realize that you're potentially overcomplicating your infrastructure by allowing SaaS sprawl, right? It overcomplicates your support. It overcomplicates your training of your employees, and those are sort of soft costs. Like Matt, you were saying earlier. Maybe they don't get considered when you look at some of those larger numbers you were talking about earlier. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for companies to understand the risk, the overall risk of what this does financially and operationally.
Anything to add, Matt?
I think Dan and Henny did a great job on that kind of summary. I'm good on that one, Emma.
Okay, great. Next question. So how do you recommend companies approach SaaS governance overall without stifling innovation and agility? Especially when it comes to segregation of duties that Henny touched on earlier, for example. Many companies see SOD as a hindrance, an obstacle. It just gets in the way. So what do you recommend an approach without stifling agility and innovation?
And if it's okay, maybe I'll lead out with this one. You can back me up.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think, Emma, one of the, when it comes to separation of duties concerns, it's always important to make sure that as a company, you're looking at what are the risks that are most relevant to create the posture of least privilege, to Henny's point earlier. And, out of the box, rule sets can have, hundreds of separation of duties considerations and sensitive access considerations. But when you really boil it down, you go from hundreds down to maybe 100 or less, or 150 or less, depending on the size and scope of your platform and your enterprise. So it's really about, one, kind of understanding your risk and tailoring your rule set accordingly. And then two, where companies run into a lot of work when it comes to separation of duties testing is if they don't have an automated solution in place that can help them with that, right? In the past, before automated solutions were around to help with separation of duties testing, it was a lot of Excel spreadsheets, dumping data from one system or another system, and then commingling in spreadsheets. Now that manual work has really been, automated and streamlined. So it's important for folks to also look at what types of systems they have in place to further manage that, automate that, while also making sure that they have the right lens in place with respect to their testing rule set.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think the key here is in that automation. Leveraging AI through the platforms to do the heavy lifting for you, because it will become worse, right? I mean, something we didn't even talk about is the proliferation of even more SaaS, or shall I say the speed of which SaaS applications are going to be developed is absolutely kicking into hyper gear at this point, due to the ease of which you can build applications these days leveraging AI. And so the problem that we're seeing today is just going to get worse and worse. So throwing people at the problem really isn't a good solution, because you will never catch up. And so that's why we feel so passionate about leveraging AI to combat all of that with AI, right? So the SafePass platform has the ability to automate a lot of the heavy lifting, and will focus on where you have your potential gaps, and that way you can just very easily address the problems as and when needed. And then last but not least, I think it's important to just, like Matt was saying, understand your risk, right? Not all SaaS applications are created equal. Not all have the same risk. And so you have to understand your risk, and you have to understand how that affects your operations. And I think those things combined should give you a North Star in terms of trying to determine what you should do.
Yeah, great advice.
I think that's a great point, and I think also pointing out what folks specifically should not do, as we've seen some of these lower cost AI solutions come on. We've definitely seen that their storage, their data storage is not really that agreeable to many organizations. So I think understanding what your North Star is, and helping folks understand what they specifically should not be doing too.
Yeah, I think one other thing that we didn't touch on is, I think it's important to arm your IT organization with kind of like an approval process, right? That you don't just blindly allow people to sign up to whatever it is that they want to use. I think there needs to be a process of vetting. Does this make sense for our organization? Because Johnny working in the warehouse that needs a solution that he thinks he has a solution for in terms of a SaaS solution may not understand what he needs to look for. So it's really important to adjust your policies to facilitate that in your organization.
Yeah, great advice there. And talking about AI, obviously AI itself needs to be governed, right? How can, governance solutions like SafePass, where does it come in when it comes to governing the AI itself? Henny?
Yeah, I think it's important to ensure that you have the appropriate access controls to the various solutions out there, right? I mean, ultimately, all of these AI solutions are just an application, right? I mean, if you really cut it down to what it is, that's what the nuts and bolts of it. It has some significant capability, and with that comes, just like any other application, comes the ability to store data. And so just like we're evaluating, let's say, Workday as an example, which is a cloud ERP, or shall I say cloud HRMS system, you would look at it very similarly, right? You would say, okay, who has access to do what within this platform? And where would they store their data? Does those things fall in line with our enterprise policies and risk and compliance rules and so on, and evaluate it based on that.
Matt, Dan, you have anything to add there about, how organizations can go about governing the AI itself?
Yeah, I think AI, I mean, we've seen the rate of innovation in AI, just coming into the year has been significant, right? And I think ultimately what powers AI, which kind of dovetails into what Henny's saying, is the database, right? And the data structures within the AI. So really what people have to understand first is it's the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. So what data am I putting into a database or a data model? How is that data being created, curated, and ultimately rendered for use within the LLM, which is kind of the next piece of the application, before it actually is able to be consumed by kind of the generative AI that sits on top of kind of that data structure. So it's really important first to start fundamentally with that data piece. The second piece to governing AI is really making sure that you have a clearly defined either vision or ideally policy that defines what acceptable use or unacceptable use of AI is. And Henny touched on this earlier. It's also important to make sure that you're aware of what applications other team members may be using, and are those applications authorized, right? There's a whole, there's a lot of AI applications out there. So it really comes down to, as a company, which ones are you approving? And then it's also important to understand that the AI platforms have different levels of subscription pricing. And with those subscription prices also comes some privacy in terms of how your corporate data is being used or not used to train the underlying models. So, there's a number of different levers to pull to fully understand and govern AI and AI acceptable use and ethical use. And then, there's the other component, which is who should have access to the actual AI platforms that have been approved for use within the business.
Anything to add, Dan?
No, I think Matt and Hattie did a great job of hitting that one out of the park.
Okay, great. And last question before we wrap up today's session: how can organizations balance the flexibility of, the need for SaaS and the adoption of SaaS with the need for strong security and compliance controls? Anyone?
Emma, can you repeat that question one more time? Because there were two key questions in that one question. I want to make sure we've got those two pieces.
Yeah, okay. So how can organizations balance the flexibility of, the need for SaaS or the adoption of SaaS with the need for strong security and compliance controls?
Well, I think those two pieces go hand in hand, right? I think that if you look at the application landscape that we're currently living in, and if you look forward, SaaS applications are here to stay, right? And that kind of goes back to Dan's earlier point in the conversation. So I think as folks look out at subscribing to software applications, they're going to be SaaS based. In certain cases, they're still going to be on-prem or a hybrid deployment, again, depending on the type of software we're talking about. So I think that SaaS is going to be the way that software is delivered, distributed, and maintained for the foreseeable future. And I think kind of part and parcel to that is really the need to make sure that you understand the risks and you're able to secure the access to those SaaS applications to really make sure that it's aligning to your business objective and allowing you as a business to kind of reach your North Star. So I think those two pieces really go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Anyone have any additional insights?
I think Matt did a great job there in answering that question. I think the only thing I can add is, you know, like I said before, not all SaaS is created equal. So it's a matter of striking that balance between ensuring that your organization is protected, yet having the ability to access whatever it is you need to access. No SaaS solution should be overlooked in terms of segregation of duty or access governance, you know, at the price of increasing risk for the organization. I don't think that should ever be done. That's a slippery slope, and I think that's a dangerous place to go. You know, so I think that should always be your North Star is, you know, what is protecting the enterprise, and looking at alternatives, right? Because there are. I mean, I think, like I mentioned earlier, with AI, the speed at which SaaS applications are being built is just through the roof. And so what we are seeing is that there's a lot of choice out there, and that in itself creates a problem because you know, it's so easy to swipe your card essentially, right, and subscribe to these SaaS solutions.
Yep.
But I think people do need to be mindful of that and really do their due diligence before they do that, because once the data has been put out there, it's practically impossible to get it removed, right? You know, just a very basic example is everyone knows what ChatGPT is. How many people have, you know, put some business, let's say some business data, let's say, you know, a bunch of numbers into ChatGPT and asked them to do an analysis on that and make a recommendation? Well, guess what? You've just exposed your company's data without realizing that you've done that. So again, there are solutions to curb these things, right? There are most of the AI solutions out there will run in a let's call it private setting, right? So you can deploy these things in a private cloud and get the exact same functionality, but with your own protections. And so that's ways to look at these solutions to kind of fold them into your enterprise risk appetite so that it doesn't expose the enterprise.
Yep, great advice there. Oh, oops. So yeah, so I think that's a wrap for today's session, unless anybody has any closing thoughts, closing remarks.
Great to be here today.
Yep. I hope our audience today found our session insightful and that you can walk away with some practical strategies to better manage your SaaS environment. So thank you to everybody who submitted some questions today. We had some great discussions, and if we didn't get to your question, then we'll be sure to follow up with you in an email. So if you'd like to learn more and have a deeper dive, then you have our contact information there on the screen. We'll also be sending out the recording after the session, so please look out for that in your inbox. So a big thank you to Matt and Dan from Altum Strategy Group. It's a pleasure to have you as always. And Henny Vermeulen from the SafePass team. We appreciate your time and engagement, and we look forward to seeing everybody again at the next session. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.